I was struck by a tweet that you found from Lothian Hospital, which I think sums up what everybody is worried about when it comes to the NHS at the moment. Basically, they tweeted a big message saying, "We are great. We are working so hard. My staff are brilliant, but for God's sake, don't come and see us because we're too busy. We're overwhelmed, and unless your condition is life-threatening, so you have to self-diagnose, don't come to the hospital." I cannot praise and thank our staff enough for the ways in which they are continuing to respond to these new challenges. However, there is no denying we are in a serious situation. This was the essence of the message from Lothian Hospital, and I think it's going on all over the country, not only from hospitals, also from GPs. It's basically saying, hey, public, we're great, but keep away from us, especially if you're sick. They're very, very keen on protecting themselves, but not that keen on protecting us.
Well, that's it in essence. I read a staggering statistic recently that over 70,000 people, in terms of excess home deaths since the start of the pandemic. And within that, 12% are only COVID. So that is people who are either too scared to go to hospital or they're getting turned away. And that Lothian example is a snapshot, as you said, that's happening all over the country. And if you look at Scotland, for instance, 300 beds have been cut over the last year during a pandemic. And in the UK, or actually in England and Wales, 5,000 beds. So you're right to say we are basically told to protect the NHS. And it seems that part of that is to stay away. So how is that protecting us?
Yeah, I mean, this message, it's from, I'm trying to work out who it's from. It's from the chief executive, Callum Campbell of NHS Lothian. I mean, it is just a massive praise for themselves, for how wonderful they are, while warning the public to stay away unless their conditions are life-threatening because they're under extreme duress. Now, I certainly don't want to cast aspersions about what kind of duress various hospitals are under, but I'm afraid there is a familiar picture here. At this time of year, hospitals start doing this. They start saying, it's winter, we're under extreme conditions, we're under so much pressure. And basically, that's, although there's no denying that does happen, part of the process is to tell the government we need more money. This is what they do every year.
It is that. I mean, at the moment, only 5% of hospital beds are full of COVID patients. And yet they're turning people around the sort of demand of COVID. And we have obviously the excess home deaths aspect as well. We also have a huge amount of figures in terms of delayed treatment. So, for instance, over the last year, 30,000 delayed treatments on cancer care. Now, I was reading a report that's in the States, but it's relevant here. There's reports here as well, where, for instance, individuals who are getting turned away from hospitals, which might start off as a minor ailment, and if they're getting turned away repeatedly for month after month after month, in total for about 18 to 20 months, then that minor issue could well become a serious issue. And that's part of the reason we've now got this huge backlog of almost 6 million people waiting for treatments, which is a record, which has come through the pandemic. So while there's a prioritization, understandably so to an extent, about COVID, when you see figures that only 5% of hospital beds are full of COVID patients, you have to ask the question, well, what about everyone else? What about non-COVID treatments? And that is the forgotten tragedy in this crisis. If we're looking at COVID, we have to look at COVID in the round. And we have to look about treatments in the round. And we have to look about why waiting lists are going up and why hospital beds are being cut in hospitals.
Let's ask ourselves why people are going to A&E, why hospitals feel they have to say, unless your condition is serious, unless it's life-threatening, don't come here. By the way, I mean, how would you know? How would you know whether or not your condition is life-threatening? We're not doctors. That's the whole point of going to see doctors. Anyway, why are they saying this? Often it's because they can't get to see their GPs. The medical profession seems to be building a wall between itself and the public. We were sent by a listener a photo of what greeted him when he went to Gloucester Hospital today. A big sign saying A&E, just to warn you, it will be at least 8 hours before anyone sees you. It's unbelievable.
It is. I mean, there's waiting time. That's the thing. How does an individual know what is wrong with them? That's the reason they go to see a GP or they go to A&E or whatever. It might be an accident that, in terms of what's happening after the accident, it might be actually worse in terms of the physical repercussions. It could be an ailment that the very nature you go to see a GP is to find out what is wrong with you by diagnosis. If you're doing it on Zoom call, can that provide an effective diagnosis sometimes? I don't really remember many cases of Zoom calls being able to take blood pressures or blood tests. The delay in treatment is a massive part of the problem with this. And so, yes, COVID is a priority, but all health should be a priority. And if they haven't fixed this, whether it's the hospitals, whether it's government, after 18 months, and we go into the winter, when 5% of our beds are full of COVID patients, and they're saying there's going to be delays or possible restrictions to protect the NHS, I think a lot of the public aren't going to buy that this year. We're post-jab. We've done a bit for 18 months. And if they use the premise that we've got to protect the NHS, but the NHS isn't protecting us, I think a lot of people will get to the point that it's enough is enough.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, James, I think it's a kind of attitude problem here. That because of the strange year and a half or so that we've been through, seems to have recalibrated the way the medical fraternity views the rest of us. And this NHS Lothian message that you found, I mean, it is full of self-love, self-praise, how wonderful we are, and full of a kind of sort of, if not loathing, a kind of disdain for the public. You know, don't bother us. You've got to protect the NHS. Don't come and see us unless you can self-diagnose that you're dying. That's what's gone wrong. There's an attitude problem now, isn't there?
I think there is. I mean, it's like, for instance, the union pressure through the BMA.
Yeah, quite. That's exactly what I should have said.
How can GPs possibly see patients face to face? That's the front of house. Go and see, well, the two front of houses are A&E for particular accidents and emergencies by the very nature of the name, and also diagnosis from GPs. And to do that effectively, it has to be face to face. And if you're not getting face to face, it's part of the reason we're obviously having treatment delays, or people are getting more seriously ill over the course of, say, 18 months of a pandemic.
Yes, glad you brought the BMA up, the British Medical Association. Let's just make it clear. It sounds like an august body of highly qualified professionals. It's not. It's a militant trade union. It's a left-wing trade union for doctors who have come up with the extraordinary strategy that in order to protest against the government's attempts to get GPs to see their patients face to face, have told GPs not to see patients. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up, could you?
But this comes back to my first point, Kevin, as well. When you go back to the figure of 70,000 plus excess deaths at home, all these areas we're talking about, GPs not doing face-to-face and not turning up at A&E and not getting treatments in times of waiting lists, that is the cause and therefore the effect of 70,000 plus people in terms of excess deaths at home. Because people are either too scared to go to hospital, they're told not to go to hospital or the GP, or they're being sort of shoved somewhere else, or it's done on a Zoom call. It's a massive problem with this crisis, and it's part of the reason we go into the winter where the same stories are happening again about winter crisis. Now, if you look back at newspaper headlines in terms of winter crisis with the NHS, it's been going on for decades. COVID cycle is no different to that, but we have the supply in most of our hospitals still. I think in terms of spare capacity at the moment, it's about 6.6%. 5% is used by COVID, but there's huge treatment delays on all the non-COVID issues within our health system at the moment. And if we go into the winter, the major problem we're going to be focusing on is the question that needs to be asked: why are people not getting treated in time? Why are people not getting diagnosed in time? Having 6 million people on waiting lists is a huge number, and that number has significantly increased through the pandemic for all the reasons we've just talked about.
And they think that number will swiftly go up to about 15 million, almost incalculable. But as I say, this is it's an attitude problem, I think, and throughout what we're dealing with now. Don't forget the recent parliamentary committee report on the COVID crisis, chaired by Jeremy Hunt, the former health secretary, did conclude, among its many conclusions, that the protect the NHS obsession, that banging of that drum, was a mistake, because it deterred too many people. It made people feel irresponsible, uncharitable if they went to see a doctor or to see their local hospital, that they banged that drum too much. And we are left now, as you say, with this enormous waiting list, and also the fact that 800 people a week more than normal are dying at home. They're dying at home, 800 more than normal. So this protect the NHS, we have to consign that to the scrap heap of history, and I think start to tell these hospitals and doctors, you're there to treat the sick. We're not there to protect you. You are there to treat the sick. Now get on with your damn jobs.
I completely agree. I mean, I put something up today on Twitter. I mean, on average, 450 people die in the UK from cancer every day. But you don't see the screaming headlines about that. Now, I recognize that obviously in terms of the numbers on COVID, it is a tragedy. But so are cancer deaths, so are heart attacks, so are huge amounts of treatment delays. All of this, every health issue needs to be considered, I think, equally. That's the whole point. When we pay our taxes, we expect our public services to be running well. And that is from whether it's local authorities, whether it's schools, whether it's hospitals, whether it's government. Now, I understand the issue that for maybe a decade of austerity, that in terms of pay and also infrastructure, the NHS wasn't getting a fair share of in terms of revenue. But we're at a situation now where there's a prioritization, it feels, to a lot of the public towards COVID and nothing else. And when, for instance, the waiting lists are stacking up, you see things like that tweet from Lothian today, hospitals around the country are giving off the same messages along with the government that they've got to be protected. And effectively what they're meaning by that is to protect them, the public have to stay away. So therefore, how are the public being protected by the NHS?
It's extraordinary. James, always a pleasure to talk. Thank you so much for your time. James Melville, political and social commentator there. He'll be back next Wednesday, regular time. Every Wednesday night, always good to talk to him.